Hello, and welcome to another episode of For the Love of Sports. My name is Michael Rasile. This is the show where we get to talk about sports, we get to talk about business, and we get to talk about everything in between. However you're listening, wherever you're listening, you know what to do. 5-star review, leave a review, like and subscribe. Those are all the good ones. So if you're there, take the 5 seconds. It really helps me out, and I appreciate it. So thank you all for that. More importantly, today, reoccurring guest. We have Andy Frye. He came on a while ago. I want to say back in 2020, Andy. It's been a minute, but Andy Frye is a sports writer for Forbes. He's the host, producer of Andy Frye's sports podcast. He's adjunct faculty of communications at National Louis University. Most importantly, out today, the author of 90 Days in the 90s. Go to 90daysinthe90s.com or Amazon to grab the book. Andy, how you doing, man?
Good. How you doing? This is actually our last time that we spoke into the podcast. I had bedhead and I was like, no video. I didn't even know like you did video with pretty much everybody. So now people get to see me on a day that I get a haircut and know that I'm not made up. So
well, you're looking good with the new haircut. The book is out. It's feeling fresh. I'm very excited to get to talk to you about everything. Right? You. I've told you this, and I'll say this again. Like, you interview people for a living. That's like my absolute dream. This is my favorite thing I do. So
yeah.
Hopefully one day, Andy, I'll be right there with you. But until then, we'll get there. And as you know, everybody on the For the Love of Sports podcast gets to answer this question first. Andy, why do you love sports so much?
It's a complicated reason. To me, it's just something that you grow up loving your teams, but then you realize that sports is so much more. So I think I've said it before. I'm fascinated with the sort of the social implications, or just like the little things we notice about sports that we think don't matter, really matter. Like I grew up Catholic on the East Coast. I was an altar boy. Despite that, I've never been like a fan of Notre Dame, but I've always been fascinated why Irish Catholics, whether you live in Idaho, New Mexico, New York, you're a fan of Notre Dame. But nobody goes to, as far as I know, nobody goes to USC because they're Methodist. Like there's this strange cultural links in different sports, and they're asymmetric and they're just kind of random. And, it depends on who you talk to in different places that everybody's got like something to say about sports, and everybody's got something that excites them. Whether or not it makes sense, whether or not I've met people I met a guy, so I'm a Cubs fan. I've been here in Chicago for over 25 years. I want to say it was like the spring. I was on spring break 2016. I was in Punta Cana. I got to do a lovely vacation with my family and friends. And I see this guy. I got up really early because I couldn't sleep. I think I didn't sleep through the night. I went for like early breakfast, which is like 5 a.m. And there's this guy with his family, and he's got Cubs watch, Cubs hat, Cubs shirt. I'm like, oh, you from Chicago? He's like, no, I'm from Arizona. I was like, oh, you live by Mesa, like where they play, spring training or they do Grapefruit League baseball. I was like, no, I live like up almost by, Nevada or someplace. And told me he's a Cubs fan because he grew up watching WGN. And we talked about like the Cubs, and back then it was months early. We thought, oh, they could really go to the World Series. Like this could really be it. And geographically and maybe culturally, that guy had no reason to be a Cubs fan, but he was. And I'm fascinated by stuff like that. So I can tell you stories all day, but it just never ceases to be boring, never ceases to fascinate me how sports affect us. And so that's my long answer on why I like sports. But I could go on for 2 hours. That's the Cliff Notes of it.
That's fine. I got 2 hours, man. If you got it, I'll talk to you all day, Andy. I always think that's really interesting too, right? Like I remember growing up, we had WGN. So I come from a Mets household. So we'd watch the Mets, and when the Mets went to commercial break, we'd turn on the Yankees. And I was always confused. Mom, why are we watching the Yankees? We don't like the Yankees. She's like, yeah, we're rooting against the Yankees.
Yeah.
So then we'd wait. And then if both of those games were on commercial break, we'd go to WGN and watch, whatever was happening in the Cubs game. And I never really got that. Now, the Mets and the Cubs, if I'm not mistaken, used to be in the same division back in the day. It was way before my time. Maybe sometime in the 90s. I don't remember.
No. But a long time ago, they were both. Well, when the Mets first came on the scene, in the 60s, they were an upstart team, but it only took them a couple of years to win after Casey Stengel was there. Once the Yankees get rid of him, I don't remember what year it was, but they won the World Series, the first World Series in the 60s. And the Cubs were kind of good back then. It all went downhill for a while until the mid-'80s, and, that we could go into detail on that. But I think we probably share the same sort of sentiment about what to expect from our teams and sort of the ups and downs, and also the other, the team from the other side of town. That's always an interesting dynamic too, the way it splits households and
Yeah.
neighborhoods and stuff.
I mean, you're in Chicago, so you have the White Sox. I'm in New York, so it's Mets and the Yankees. So
Yeah.
it's always interesting and where that love of sports come from. And I really love your answer because it's the stories. It's a random, makes no sense. So this guy in Arizona lives and dies by this team that's based out of Chicago that he may or may have not ever seen play once
Yeah.
real in his life. And it's just so interesting how things like that happen. And it always just brings a smile on my face to hear interesting stories like that. I think it's fun. And thankfully, luckily, no, not luckily, we don't believe in luck here, but gratefully, your job is you literally interview people for Forbes,
Yeah.
right? You interview people across, you worked at ESPN, you worked for Rolling Stone. We went into it the whole time, so I'll link out
Yeah.
to Andy's first episode that we did, so we don't have to go through all of it. But I guess give us another Cliff Notes. Like, what have you been doing? Who have you been interviewing? How incredible is it still? Do you pinch yourself every day how much fun you get to have with your job?
Yeah, well, I have to, to keep it real, I gotta say it's one of my jobs. I'm not a staffer for Forbes. I never was. I wasn't a staffer for ESPN. But kind of the cool part of it is, so I'll touch, I kind of touch on this in my book because my book is about the 90s and the music scene. I kind of consider, like, I think my favorite punk rock bands, and this is maybe a 50-year-old trying to grasp it, still being young, but like I have had the best experience in terms of being able to write what I want. There's been times I've had to pitch stories and the answer is no. But I don't work for a news desk. I'm not a staffer. Nobody says you're going to cover a rodeo this season, whether you like it or not. It's more, what stories I find are interesting. And I've gotten to interview some really great people just by building relationships over the years. So it's being a freelance sports writer, whether it's for a local paper or for ESPN, if you get the chance to do that, is pretty entrepreneurial. And, I've known people like me in the same role who are great at reaching out to editor and be like, hey, you don't know me. I got a great idea. I'd love to write for your publication. Others that like have the home phone number of the publisher of Esquire. I got a story about that. And it's like, they're actually like, know the person and they're too afraid to pitch the story because they're like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I should. I'm not really good at that. Like, so I always look at it's an opportunity to do something that originally, like 15 years ago, was just something that when I was blogging kept me sane. Like when I was selling financial products, insurance, investments, plans, and, liked some of it and hated some of it, and was dealing with underwriters and a lot of like, almost like Soviet bureaucratic type stuff that's part of the financial world, unless you're a trader, I suppose. So in the beginning, it was me blogging to be sane and to talk about sports with my friends. And then eventually I just kind of took my entrepreneurial skills, basically my sales skills, and got to write for, got a contact at ESPN, pitched them a few times, and it took a while to kind of work things out. But yeah, I've gotten to interview some really great people. So like for Forbes, again, just based on relationships I have with PR people and publicity, people in the publicity business who work the sports sort of circle. I got to speak to Lindsey Vonn today. Got to interview her for the third time. She's always got a bunch of stuff going on, but she's in a series called I'm drawing a blank here. But she's in a newish TV series that has to do with motivation and she's been involved in a number of different businesses, like she does her own kind of fashion line for Head, with skis and so on. And she's pretty amazing, and she's got the entrepreneurial mindset too. So it's cool to talk to somebody who's understands business, but is an athlete and talks about being an athlete. The Greatness Code, sorry, that's the name of the special that she's in, called The Greatness Code. It's a series based about athletes kind of deep down, reaching in and grabbing the motivation, like when they're not, when they have an injury or where they're not performing their best. So she's super cool. She's kind of chill and just like a normal person. And they get to talk to her about skiing and winning gold medals, but also like her dogs and, The Greatness Code, this new series that she's in. And, her personal experience is really cool. So, I mean, she's one. I got to talk to Shaq twice. Again, his businesses, like he owns like 15 pizza locations for Papa John's. He owns some gyms. And so he talks like a business person. And then like some old school people, like I grew up in the 80s loving the Sixers. One of my heroes was Julius Erving. I got to interview him like 3 years ago when he was doing he was a coach for the Big Three League, Ice Cube's 3-on-3 league. So, and then it's I got to interview a blind sprinter last year for the Paralympics, a guy named David Brown, who, like you talk to him, and I think he was born partially blind and became like had a deteriorating visual situation, and his eyes just kind of went bad. But so you talk to him, it looks like he's wearing a sleeping mask, but he's like all about it. He's like he's got the bravado. He's a little cocky. He's like, yeah, I'm the best at what I do. I'm gonna kill it. I'm out there to win some more gold medals. That's the way it is. He's not tepid by any means. You love to see that from all kinds of athletes. So there's some people that you've probably never heard of that I talked to that are just as interesting as, talking with an NBA Hall of Famer, or I guess I talked to Tom Brady about 6 months ago, and he was down to earth and super cool, whether you like him or not, or hate his football team. He was, as straight as they come. So he's an example. But yeah, I mean, I've probably interviewed, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred athletes by now. Everything from the high school kid who scored the winning touchdown to someone who's, was in the Hall of Fame starting, a decade or two ago.
It's just incredible. Again, you can kind of name dropping. Oh yeah, by the way, I do know who Tom Brady is.
Yeah, I don't mean to name drop, but you're like, oh, who have you interviewed? Well,
I wanted to know, and I want the people out there to understand why I think what you do is so darn cool. And yeah, obviously, as you said, it's not, it's piece of your income. You do a bunch of different stuff, and that allows you to be a part of this and be able to do something like this and have fun with it. And I just think it's so interesting. And so with that, I guess the opportunity, right? So we're talking about sports. We're talking about writing about sports.
Mm-hmm.
Where does this idea for kind of like a time travel book, if I'm not mistaken, back into the 90s to talk about the punk rock scene? Like talk to me about like where does this idea for 90 Days in the 90s even come from, considering your background in sports and everything that you've been writing about over the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't start becoming a sports writer or a freelance sports writer until about 2009, 2010. So, I mean, before that, I was writing as a hobbyist. But I don't know. I mean, I guess being a writer, I liken it this way to people, especially when I'm teaching my classes to college students. It's like you learn to, if you're a writer, you do it. I can't speak for every profession, but I liken writing to being a video gamer. Like, there's nobody that I know of, and I don't think there's very many people who go, oh, Dan TDM or Big Cheese, like they made $10 million last year. I'm going to start playing video games because that sounds like a good career. People who play video games do it because they love it, because, they can't get away from it. They have fun. For me, writing was always that way. I like to just maybe get my thoughts on paper, and I was sort of fascinated with writers and, like little things like I hate playing cards. I don't like playing euchre. I went to college in Ohio. I don't like playing euchre. Don't really like video games. Board games are okay. I don't know, for whatever, just writing was always a thing. So if you are a writer, whether you do it professionally or not, I think it's an intuition thing, and you're always sort of thinking like, I should write this down. This sounds good. I love these words together, the subject, or this needs to be said. So in the background, there's always an inkling to write a book, but that's a whole nother thing. So, I was born in 1972. I grew up in the 1980s, in the Reagan era. I graduated from high school in 1990 when, at least from our perspective, I could be full of it, and my generation could be full of it. Like, things started to happen in 1990. Like, the Berlin Wall had just fallen, I think, the fall before. The Soviet Union, communism was looking like it was dead. On the music side, we went from, on the radio, like New Kids on the Block and Debbie Gibson, to Nirvana, Alice in Chains, L7. I remember, like, in 1990, the biggest hard rock band in the world, Living Colour. All black guys from a band of guys from New York who I think went to Fordham Prep together. And, The Cure was kind of, like big, but not big like they are now in 1989, as were the Pixies. And like some stuff was really happening. And, I've always remembered that. And it's kind of a generational thing. We all look back to the past in some part of our life and say, it was really better back then when this was like that. Or when I got to, we forget that when we were 22 and had no responsibility, that we also ate ramen noodles every night and had no money and had to do our laundry and didn't have enough change to dry it and, put it all over our apartment. It was wrinkled. Like, we forget about the bad and remember the good. So the idea from the book came up. Like, my best friend is a guy named Doug Milam. He's a poet and short story writer. He used to live here. He moved up to the Pacific Northwest probably about a decade ago. And we have all these like stupid inside jokes. And one of them just was like, in the 90s, I think one day I had a dream that I was like, hey, I dreamed last night that we got on the L, which is like the train system here in Chicago, and we went to Sri Lanka for the afternoon. And my friend Doug is kind of like a science guy, and he's like, oh, that's interesting. Did you know Arthur C. Clarke lives in Sri Lanka? I was like, well, no. How would I know that? Now you can ask Alexa. I was like, where does, you could ask a question like, how old is Johnny? When was Johnny Cash born? And you'll get his birth date. Where you had to go to the library when I was in high school to find out anything like that. So we always had this running joke like, oh, what if we like, took a time travel to like go back to see Nirvana's first show, or like, what if we could hop on the L and do that? And it just kind of sat in my mind for a while. And actually, literally, I started writing the book 5 years ago today. So I'm not making that up, but I got the idea over Easter in what was 5 years ago, 2017. Was just taking a long walk. We were vacationing with our friends who live up in Michigan. They've got this great big house up in Traverse City. And my son and our friend's son, they went like mini golfing with Dave because he's a golf nut. And my wife went out with our other friend, and they did girl stuff. And I was kind of like at home doing stuff on the computer because I had some work to do. Finally decided to go take a walk, and I'm just listening to one of my 90s playlists that I make, and I've got like 60 of them on Spotify. And I was just kind of thinking about that. And then, long story short, the way that it works for some writers is you have an idea, whether it's you wake up in the middle of the night or you're in a bar and you write on a bar napkin. And for some of us, the test is if you care about that idea in like 2-3 weeks, like you wrote it down and you still think it's cool, then what do I do with this? I got to do something with it. So that was what it was. I literally was walking around Grand Traverse Bay on kind of a warm, cloudy day, like stopping with my Samsung phone and just like taking notes. Like, oh, what if I could time travel with the 1990s? Like I used to joke with my friend, what would I do? Who would be the character? Where would I go? I don't know why I was motivated that day. I might have just had a lot of coffee and was really into my 90s playlist is probably what it was. So played with the idea for a couple of weeks, and then like June 1st, I thought, okay, I'm going to try to write this. I don't know. Yeah, I guess if you're writing a book, you got to come up with like 100,000 words or so. I don't know where that's going to come from. And yeah, just kind of the plot was, originally it was actually like something like me. It was like a white guy, who was in his mid 40s or something, goes back to time travel, but I wasn't really sure how he got to the 90s. And eventually you tweak and you realize things got to make sense. And you're in love with the plot and the themes, but you got to make it work. So somewhere in 2020, I decided that to change some things about the character. So the plot and the theme was still someone goes back to the 1990s to kind of fix their kind of like do-over life. Like if we could kind of go back and fix things, that's what it was. But I had to kind of come up with a real time machine that worked and some real reasons to go back. And I also, in the fall of 2020, I'd written maybe a couple drafts, had about 100,000 words. I really had to trim it down and had the realization that probably after, no matter where you are politically, 5 years of Trump and Me Too and George Floyd, that probably the last thing publishers wanted at that time and maybe going forward was a story about a middle-aged white guy who wants to go to back to the past. So I kind of tweaked it and made my character female, but kind of like someone that I would hang out with, who I would totally get, who might own a record store and would like some of the same music as me. But, it was really just more about sort of the type of character who generationally would appreciate the same things as me. Has been around the block, but wants to do, some of those things that we all want to do, like tweak their life, and they have regrets and they want to fix things, but by and large, they just want to travel and explore stuff. So, yeah, 90s and 90s, which was just an idea that seemed kind of preposterous, time travel back to a better period. But then sort of the subplot is that Darby's back in the 90s, and she's having a blast, and then that kind of becomes the problem. Like, she's having too much of a good time to actually deal with her stuff. And then realizes that the golden age of the past isn't perfect. That it's just like any other time. Like I said, all this time, all those things that we forget about. We can think about the Cubs in 2016, how awesome it was, but there's a couple times like the last game we're down, in extra innings or close. I guess we're in extra innings and we blew the lead and we weren't going to win the World Series in Cleveland, but then we pulled it out. Like we forget about all the rough times, we remember the glory, but I wanted to treat the whole trip as like, a serious thing. So
Yeah, so you're kind of paying homage to the things that you liked, and then also remembering, hey, there was also some other stuff that was going on there that wasn't perfect. I mean, the '90s. So I was born in '91,
Yeah.
I remember kind of the latter half, and obviously I've heard about the '90s.
Mhm.
I know the music. I've paid attention to it. There's also a lot of bad stuff. I think like heroin became a really bad thing in the '90s. I don't know how deep you get into this stuff. My
Yeah.
book is in the mail, so I'm very excited to read it when it does get here. But it's just one of those things that obviously you could look back on any period of time, right, and figure out all that kind of stuff. So I'm curious, like the writing process for you. So I'm sure many of the listeners know I also wrote a book. You can go in the show notes and grab it for free. You can go on Amazon. It's $1. You can buy a hard copy or a soft cover from Amazon as well. Winning in Sports Business, and it was a lot of fun to write that. And it was nonfiction. It was interview based. Like I went through and I was like, oh, yeah, I did it. However many, 250 interviews, 200 interviews up to that point. I was like, I'll do some more, but also just take from the really good ones. I'll be able to put the narrative together and help people get a job in sports. That's the ultimate goal of the book. What is it like, as you said, like, I mean, you change the story multiple times. You have to figure out like a real reason to time travel, like quote unquote, for people that are just listening. What is that like, considering coming from, writing about sports business, talking to athletes and something that's relatively concrete, to being as, not abstract, but as fictional, as kind of in your own brain, as you kind of have control of this, but you also know that there's a little bit of guardrails. Like, what's that like, kind of the dichotomy and the switching back and forth between those two types of writing styles?
Well, I mean, so your book was kind of like a long version of 50 First Dates about sports, right? So one thing I think
Thank you. I'll take that, actually.
maybe you've noticed is that you get the way. I mean, so okay, cool. I've got to interview Lindsey Vonn and Tom Brady for 8 minutes over, just audio Zoom, and I've got to sit down with some other athletes in person, and I think you realize that they're all like real. They're just like real people. If you treat them like real people, you try to BS them around, and you get the inside scoop or whatever. That people are going to brush you off. So I think just kind of learned from sports interviewing, just everybody across the board, that you learn authenticity and how to kind of treat subjects real. But also, like, between that, so I used to take improv classes. I performed at Second City with a group. It's basically me and a bunch of millennials called the Disappointments. And what you learned from that is dialogue and how to write. Basically, when you're writing a scene, it can be about something as banal as like, hey, who stole my chapstick? Where's my chapstick? Or to like, tell me about this important thing. That people dialogue in a way that is real, and there's a lot of ums and uhs and likes, and let me think about that. And so I get a lot of that in my sports writing. I talk to people and they talk like anybody. There are a couple people like I talked to Jay Williams, I don't know, maybe like 2 years ago, and media person. Like, I don't think he said once, and I'd ask him one of my long convoluted questions, and he'd be like, oh, it's really two questions, so which one do you want me to answer first? Like, as if he's talking to Peyton Manning about, like, why'd you only win two Super Bowls? Like you get a lot of little confrontational like that. So I think just it's a patchwork, and I think sports writing. Mine's mostly interview based too. I do some features, but I don't do any play by play. Although I've done that in the past. I've done game recaps. So all those, that's kind of a bag of different skills where you have to tell someone else's story. So if I'm writing about Lindsey Vonn and her new, venture capital firm or whatever, I'm taking what she said and I'm, sort of filtering some of it, and we're trying to piece in the pieces that maybe she didn't think to get the details about a company that she's with, and I have to explain what they're about and really kind of patchwork the picture, telling someone else's story, not just verbatim and relying only on that. So I think when you're writing a book, I think some of my favorite authors, I think I've mentioned this last time we talked, my favorite writers, I always like to read sports stories in non-sports publications, like back before Jared Kushner bought it and kind of ruined it. The New York Observer was great for sports because it would be just sort of these anecdotal stories about, like major sports teams and stars. And then some, they had a lot of quirky stuff. Like the New York Observer was great to read. Their crime blotter would be just kind of hilarious. Like, there's people reported that this man tried to rob 15 people with, a plastic spork last Wednesday. And then, there's International Herald Tribune and articles or magazines like The Atlantic. And I always like to read non-sports publications that talked about sports. So I try to take that approach, and like I'm a little removed from the subject. I'm writing about music in the 90s, trying to put myself there, but I'm not a musician, and really try to tell the story or other people's stories. And I think that's learning how to do that organically is probably part of writing a book, and then fiction is another piece of it that goes together to kind of smooth out the process and end up with something that actually reads like a fiction book.
Yeah, because I think that's the important part, right? I don't read too much fiction. It's mostly nonfiction, and the fiction I do read comes from Star Wars. So it has a pretty nice story already attached to it that I kind of know what's going on. I don't have to get too deep into it, but it's very interesting to kind of hear the way that your brain works, because it sounds like you're able to significantly pull from what you learned, right? Like my favorite movies are the ones that are just dialogue, right? Like not just dialogue, obviously, but any Quentin Tarantino movie, I will sit down and I'll watch 100 times because I love it. Because the way he has people talking, it is as natural as me and my buddies sitting on the couch after we drank a couple beers, just saying stupid shit to each other. And like that, I don't know how he does it so well, but he does. And as you said, you're able to talk to so many different types of people and hear the way that everybody talks, right? From that, buttoned up media personality of Jay Williams all the way down to, the high school athlete that just scored the winning touchdown, right? I'm sure they don't talk the same. And being able to utilize that and then take those and then not only put it into the lead character, if I'm not mistaken, Darby, it sounded like, but all the other characters that are coming through. I guess how did you remember how people talked in the 90s? Did you watch like a bunch of YouTube videos? Because like obviously things are going to change, like Chicago in the 90s and Chicago today, like, or wherever the book takes place. Like, how did you kind of make sure that you were really gaining from like, oh no, this is how people used to talk in the 90s, not just like from the way you remember it, because again, that's a little skewed, like actually how they did.
Well, I mean, I didn't overplay that. So like there's a lot of, I remember when, I remembered this when the cliche thrown under the bus became kind of commonplace, and now it's like overused. But I want to say it was about the time that I just remember it must have been like 03 or 02, because I remember it was Senator Larry Craig who was he was a senator from Idaho who got like arrested in Minneapolis airport for like something going on in the bathroom, and I remember he made a statement saying, I remember him making a statement saying like, I was thrown under the bus by the media and the media backed the bus over. And I'd heard that maybe 10 times at that point, and I just started hearing it. I'm thinking like everybody's using that now. So I didn't really want to go back and be like, don't go there, or like, let's do the Macarena.
Talk to the hand.
Yeah, talk to the hand. That's actually a pretty good one. I couldn't really remember that so much, but I also didn't want to be, tied too much to that. Like if you're writing I suppose a story about surfers, you don't necessarily have to have everyone say gnarly and what's up, dude. Hey, bro. That could be it, but it also could sound played out and inauthentic too. So I kind of focus more on Darby. Yeah, Darby is, I guess, I kind of imagine her as like Scarlett Johansson with short hair in some of the roles that she's played, or maybe when Kristen Stewart had short hair. And, so she's probably like late 40s, maybe pushing 50. She owns this record store that she inherited from her favorite uncle who just died. So backstory is like she had a career in Wall Street. It kind of fell apart about the same time that her uncle died. And like she lost her job. And so now she inherited this record store. She's got a place to live in Chicago. And it's kind of forced to come back to Chicago where she's kind of was from and, kind of deal with some things and be like, why did I ever leave? And I screwed up that relationship. And then the wheels start turning and she's, in this record store all day with, two hipsters. One's a black metalhead named Conrad, and he lives to rouse Mark, who's the, short, curly-haired, ironic hipster with like, like purposely mismatched shirt and tie. Mm-hmm. And then there's a character named Spacey, who's kind of like, I picture her like Billie Eilish a little bit, but kind of a smart ass. And she's just sort of cracking jokes and making fun of him, but she knows more about music than everybody in the store. So it gets the gears turning, and, eventually Darby hears about this urban legend that she heard before. So to kind of get to your question, I do remember when we all got email. We all got our own email address. It was a big flipping deal in 1997. Like, I worked for a company that had like one email address for the company to, Andy Frye at Euromonitor.com or whatever it was, because he worked for this company called Euromonitor. It was a big deal. And then so about 6 weeks later, you start getting emails about a lot of trivia. Like I didn't know before like say early 90, let's say late 96, early 97, when I got my email that. So if you walk around New York or Chicago and there's statues of people, war heroes, and the statue is up on its hind legs and the front legs are up, that symbolizes that the person who's being honored in that statue died in battle. If the horse is standing with four legs, they died. They lived a natural life. Like, I never knew that. So we get these trivia emails like almost daily that were actually like, wow, this is cool. I didn't know that. And then it descends into, people always joke about the Nigerian prince who wants to give you $80 million. Actually, in reality, it was, I think Laurent Kabila was the head. I used to study international relations in college. So Laurent Kabila was the head of the Congo. He got overthrown. The story was that his son was in exile and had, like $400 million. And, I need to move it. Never mind that you might be laundering money, but, dear friend, blah, 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 just, I've reached you in a time of, whatever it says, trying times of politically, and I've been deposed. I'm the rightful head of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And if you give me your routing and account number, for helping me move this money, I'll give you $20 million. And then, stupid people who think that the CD-ROM holder, is a cup holder in your computer. Like, we had pop open the CD-ROM player, you stick your cup there. I've seen people do that. So I joke about that kind of stuff. Like, I bring back those things, not like 90s lingo, but like people actually thought that the cup holder the CD-ROM that you pop it out on your compactor to go zzz, and you stick a CD, that was a cup holder. It was kind of a crappy cup holder, but that's what people thought it was. And the fact that you had email addresses and then you're getting, emails from, the other one was, all you got to do is send this email to 50 people you know. It's a Microsoft usage test, and Bill Gates will send you a check. My cousin just got a check for $80,000. Never mind that Microsoft has never paid a dividend on their stock, but okay, whatever. My mom sent it to me and was like, "Oh yeah, I don't think this is." And always like, I don't know if this is real, but what the heck? I'll pass it on. Let me know if you get paid, and we've all done that. And then also like,
you didn't get paid, did you?
No, and I remember the first time in email I got the chain letter that we used to get chain letters in the mail, like that someone from who knew somebody that I know in San Francisco, and I could kind of sometimes trace I think I knew it's my hippie friend from college, I'll keep this chain letter going. It's been, so anybody in the audience who doesn't know what a chain letter is, it's like you write a letter, you send it to 10 people, you ask them to send it to 10 or 20 other people, and there's people who are so bored. They're akin to people who, I guess, do TikTok videos now. So bored that they would rewrite this letter and send it to 20 people just to kind of see, and the letter's gone around the world since the 1960s. And, maybe there's 10 million people have received this letter. Let's keep it going. Like, that was, I remember getting that same exact chain letter in digital form as an email. I'm like, oh, really? Come on. Like, someone typed this.
Still going.
So that kind of stuff happened in the 90s. You misspell a website, you go to the wrong website, and it would be a porn website, and pop-ups would pop up. So I kind of profiled that. Nobody had a cell phone that I knew of in 1996. I mean, like maybe one person who was kind of douchey who lived at home and had a BMW and needed to have a cell phone, was willing to pay the $150 a month to have it. But yeah, there was all kinds of different technological differences from now, and I wanted to categorize that as part of the time. So I use that instead of the lingo, or obviously the music is the music, and there's a couple of news stories like that Tupac Shakur got shot in the fall of '96. It was right around the time that actually I think a year later Princess Diana was killed in a car crash, right about the same time. So there's those things that I allude to without trying to retell the story, because they're public events that you can look up on Wikipedia, but they did affect us at the time, and I try to reference them and within context of that. It's like if you walk into Barnes and Noble now and look at the headlines on the news, you'll see Ukraine war and inflation and different things that you're kind of used to now. But if you could time travel 25 years from now back to now, you'd be like, oh my God, this is so amazing. I kind of remember that. Wow, it's on the front page of the paper, There's a little wow factor, I think, with time travel or the concept of time travel. And I try to catch that.
And I think it's awesome how you're able to, as you said, you're able to touch upon the things that are happening, but still it's going to be relevant to the story. It's still going to be relevant to the characters. They're still going to have the
Yeah.
aha moment. They're still going to grow as characters, right? As you read through the pages, which I think is really interesting. Now, going to the time travel aspect of it, is this like, what kind of time travel is it? Is this Harry Potter time travel, which I totally think is BS? Is this like Back to the Future time travel? How did you
A
get
little
into
bit
the
Back to the
time travel
Future.
aspect of it?
I had to kind of confine my story to a certain thing. So I didn't want to have to. I remember the first round of pitches that I did at the San Francisco Writing Conference, and I had some agents who were like, "I like this, but this is time travel light," and or no, sorry, it's sci-fi light. It's not really sci-fi, so I'm not going to do it. And I
Yeah,
said
yeah,
honestly, like this isn't a sci-fi novel. Sort of the time travel is incidental to the whole like culture. So if you want to say it's high fidelity or hot tub, what is it? Hot
hot
tub
tub
time
time
machine
machine.
in the 90s, like basically high fidelity with time travel. I didn't even really think about that when I wrote this, but so I had to confine myself. So I did some research, and I realized that just kind of searching online, like Wikipedia, nothing really fancy. That the Chicago Transit Authority has been around since 1947, and in some form or another. It kind of grew and branched out and stopped, and it's a lot. It's somewhat limited compared to New York. New York's transit system is more expansive. There's more places you can go. It's faster. So, I just kind of thought about originally. I didn't really. I had my thought was there's this special train platform, and Darby goes up there, and at a certain time of night when two trains pass by each other, going opposite ways, that bam, she's back in the past. And I thought that doesn't really make a lot of sense, does it? So I thought about what I just told you about with the urban legends that we got via email and kind of all the crazy stuff that I'm not putting you on. We really got all kinds of stuff via email as soon as everybody got an email address. It's like we were looking to be entertained, and there's emails about copy or use, and this meeting you have to go to, and then there's the other 80%, which is like, yeah, I'm the king of Sweden, and I need to, I'm overthrowing the government. You join me in my cause. So I remember that urban legend piece of it. So I decided to use it. So the time travel comes up in that there's a line called the Gray Line, which is kind of pictured behind me in this. It's a train. I'll show it to you. That may or may not exist, and there's some different aspects. There's different stories about if it exists or not, and whether it was founded by the War Department or to fight belligerents, past, present, future, like Nazi Germany and Japan, Imperial Japan back in the World War II, and then it was abandoned. Some other people say that it's rogue scientists conducting experiments, and then they got caught or they got lost in time. But the story comes up. So Darby's all nostalgic. She moved back to Chicago. She's kind of like getting back into being a local. She hasn't in about a month or two, maybe like 2-3 months after she gets here. She finally meets up with a friend at a bar called Nisei Lounge, which is up. It's actually a real bar up by Wrigley Field. It's kind of like an old man, like drink specials bar. There are lots of fake Irish pubs around Wrigley Field, but it's not one of those. So she's having a drink with a friend, and her friend's like, kind of saying like, we had great times, and let's hang out more. And I got to go on this trip. I'm packing for a trip. I would love to stay out with you for beers a little bit longer. So then Darby's friend Tam leaves. She goes to a bar next door, which is just kind of a stereotypical like old man crappy ass bar with the Cubs game on. And she's sitting there, it's just her and an old guy, and they're talking about the Cubs, and the Cubs fan, who's about 70 years old, just starts talking about the actually a real game that existed in 2016 when Jake Arrieta threw a no-hitter against the Reds. I want to say it was maybe it was in May, and it was a no game. And he's talking about this game with Darby, and he's like, "Oh, I saw it 3 times." And she's like, "Oh, you have TiVo?" And he's like, "No, actually, I've seen it live 3 times." And she's kind of thinking, like, "What the hell is this guy? Is this guy hitting on me? Like, what the hell is he talking about?" And then eventually he's like, "You've heard the legend about the Gray Line. Like, I took it. I only use it because I'm a baseball fan. I've gone back to see legendary games." He talks about going back to '98 to see Kerry Wood's legendary performance as a rookie, and he went back to see the Don Cardwell no-hitter in 1968, and the Milt Pappas no-hitter that should have been a perfect game. And he's talking, so he's kind of getting her into it because he's talking about she's a baseball fan, and she's like, "Yeah, like she's thinking like this sounds crazy, but these stories are great. This is kind of what I needed." And then later she, through a couple of different routes, she gets curious and finds out that the Gray Line is real. and that there's a stop underneath her record store. So then, she's nostalgic for the 90s, as we Gen Xers all are. We all want to go back to see the first, the first Nirvana show, just like, people my dad's age would want to go see Jimi Hendrix play at the Isle of Wight for his last show in 1971. And she kind of plots these reasons to go and maybe whether she should or not. And it's just like, well, screw it, I'll just go. And then that's where the story starts. So she actually leaves she actually re-arrives the same day that she left in Labor Day 1996. So I kind of set some limits where you're not like, how does this happen? Or this doesn't make sense. Or does she run into herself? It's like she leaves the same day. She re-arrives the same day that she left originally when she bailed, blew out of town. And so nobody knows that she's gone. And she tries to resume her life normally. Tries to go, find that old flame that she's in love with that she screwed up. That doesn't go as well. But then other things happen. She goes to a concert. And like I did once, she's crowd surfing and lands on her head and blacks out. And then other things happen. And, it's both interesting and unexpected things happen, but also she fits right back in. But she's not dealing with her shit. Like she's went back to kind of fix some things, but she's too busy partying and having a good time that she doesn't deal with it. And the reason it's called 90 Days in the 90s is that the thing that allows you to travel is it basically looks like an an Apple Watch. It's called a time pass. It's like a 90-day timer. If you wear it while you're getting on the gray line, it's like a 90-day timer. You have 90 days to either come back to the present or stay back in the past. And wherever you are when the timer runs out, that's where you're stuck. And so she gets stuck. I'll just put that out there. And then she has to really deal with her stuff. And she really has to reconcile her life as she had meant to, while enjoying lots of it and also not really enjoying certain parts of it that didn't really go her way. So, there's that old saying, the grass is greener on the other side. I think that's all relative. The grass is greener, but then sometimes the grass is wet, and you just have to, deal with both aspects of it versus the parts that you only want to deal with. So, but for people who love the 90s, love the music, maybe a little bit of sports folklore, like the Bulls dominated. Obviously, I get to talk about how great the Bulls were. There's some sports in there, and there's a lot of pop culture about the 90s that, hopefully I feel like the approach I wanted, and I asked my beta readers this, my friends who I paid $50 to read it. I said, I think I gave them two questions, one of which was, do you feel like you're tagging along with the main character or not? If not, I want to know that. But like seriously, do you feel like that you're on a trip with the protagonist here? Because that's what I'm aiming for. And luckily, most of them said yes, and I think that kind of fueled the novel, made it way more fun to write. Especially over 5 years that I spent writing it, it has to be fun, and that's what made it fun for me.
That is awesome, man. I love it. I think it's an interesting concept, right? You get to do a lot of different things. You get to play with this, as you said. You kind of have to put some guardrails on this to make sure at least it makes sense for the people that are reading it. And I think those are the kind of books that people like, right? Like they want to tag along. They want to feel like they're either going somewhere new or going somewhere old from a different perspective, right? Now you're seeing the 90s 30 years later, right? Or, however many years later, where you have a lot of different perspectives on things, and you're able to, as you said, you're still able to have some fun, but you're also able to realize like, oh, maybe all of this didn't quite work out the way we were hoping. So you kind of answered it a little bit, but I want to make sure I ask it so we get the utmost clarity. Like, what is your goal for the readers of this book? Is it to have people just tag along and remember how much fun the 90s were, or is there a deeper lesson you're trying to get people to learn?
So when I grew up, I don't know if these were around when you were a kid, but we had these books called Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Yes, 100%.
So they were actually perfect for like Star Wars people, because it'd be like you're on a spaceship, you're the captain of this crew, you encounter this hostile, enemy ship. Basically turn to page 17 if you want to wuss out, turn to page 92 if you're going to they're firing at you now and you want to fire back. So I always enjoyed that. And I was kind of a scrawny little kid. I got picked on, but like when reading books, I was, kind of more a risk taker. So of course I'm going to go after the Klingons or whatever if they're attacking me. So there was that aspect of it. I just really wanted to, I can't make people like the music that I like. So I didn't want to write a book that's just about the Stone Roses and Oasis and Husker Du. But I wanted to kind of make it relatable. And I think the 90s are broad enough that, so my son is 15, he's going to be 16 in a couple of months here. And I could be wrong, but it seems like Gen Z has better taste in music than on average than millennials, or at least that they Gen X never fell into that. I like dubstep now because everyone else does phase that some millennials, at least here in the Midwest, got into. They're like the mashup 10-minute songs with 15 different songs. It seems like Gen Z likes, they're curious about Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins. I went to Riot Fest with my kid last fall, and he actually, the night before, so Thursday night we went to see Guns N' Roses at Wrigley. About a week or two before, he's like, we like Smashing Pumpkins is at Riot Fest. We need to go. If we go, like, I'll pay for half. He's not going to pay for half the tickets, but that's what his pitch was. So I was like, I've never seen Smashing Pumpkins, and, my wife has book club, so what the hell? I'll just, screw it, I'll get the tickets. So we went. It was great, and there's that piece of, like, I kind of want people to feel like if I invited you to go see a concert, whether or not, maybe you don't like L7, but, I have another extra ticket, I would hope you'd tag along and you might have a good time, and I don't have to get you drunk to have a good time, whether you're going to buy the band's album or not. You'd probably be like, this is a good time, a live show. I never got to see him before. Some cool stuff happened. That's kind of the approach, in that I don't want to drill, like, here's my version of music history. You have to accept it. I'm going to talk all about the bands that I like. And I mean, there's a little bit of sports trash talk. I will say that Darby, the main character, there's a backstory, some family stuff that went on, and her mom ran away with a biker guy from Queens. So she kind of hates the Mets. And it has to do with, like, I think there was a Cubs-Mets game on the day that happened. And so she just always associated that with, like, bad stuff. So, but those are real things that happen in our life. Like, I know a guy who likes the Nationals because when he was in Little League in Ohio, his team was the Expos. Now, the Expos later became the Nationals. But, he's from Central Ohio. He's not really close to Cincinnati. He doesn't like the Reds as much. He doesn't like the Indians. He just picked the Nats as his team because they were the Expos and he played. He was on the Expos in Little League, wherever he's from in Ohio. And we have these irrational reasons that we grab onto music and sports, and we remember things that no one else remembers. But it's all about having a good time while we're doing it. So I that's what I aim for. Yeah, like you're saying, just I wanted people to tag along, not feel like they got to have the same favorite memories or bands or sports teams that I have. They can have never set foot in Chicago at all, but they're going to get a flavor for it. And if you try Chicago pizza and you think it's crap because you like East Coast pizza, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you're going to kind of feel what these people are feeling as they make their way around Chicago in the 1990s, and enjoy life, and also try to figure out life, back
That's the goal, man.
Yeah.
That's all we're trying to do. We're just trying to figure this thing out. We're only here for a little while, but
yeah,
we're always just trying to figure it out. So hopefully we have a good time when we're doing it. I think it's really interesting, right? So, we started this about 45 minutes ago. And what was the first answer to the question you had? You love the weird stories and the weird reasons why people like the things they do. And I don't know if you set yourself up for that, because that's a really long play on your part, and I really appreciate it. But it's just interesting, right? Yeah. We all, growing up playing Little League, I knew a bunch of kids who, I'm on the Reds this year. The Reds are my favorite team. Next year, they're on the Marlins. The Marlins are my favorite team, right? The Rays are my favorite team. It was always funny like that. And then, yeah, as you said, the irrational, unnecessary hatred for the poor Mets who, they're the Mets. But there's that reason why she hates the Mets so much. And there's that reason. There's a literal emotional connection to when she sees or hears about the Mets. I'm sure there's a visceral reaction within her because of something that happened in her personal life. So it's always just interesting how you can tie those things together. And as you said, this is your world, so you're able to do those types of things, and you're able to pull from different stories and different people that you've learned in the past. And so I'm curious, like, that's what we're going to get out of it, the audience. I'm going to read the book when I get it. I'm very excited. It sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun.
Good.
What did you get out of writing a book?
Some of it is, the fact that, I'm a writer. Am I enough of a writer to write a book, to actually see it through? And some people write books because, let's say, if you are a consultant or you've got an expertise in something, you love crafting and quilting, like you should write a book about crafting and quilting, and maybe make a couple bucks selling. But it just kind of solidifies your repertoire. I never really look at it that way, but I think there's that piece of it. Mm-hmm. So, now that it's done, I'm thinking like, I'd like to be on some 90s music podcasts. I'll see if anybody cares. And I may not be an expert on the 90s, but I'll be sort of what's the word? Sort of misrepresented as one, or sort of, I don't know. But what I got out of it was just, I had an idea, and it actually grew. And so sounds like it's a long time. Like I spent 5 years writing this thing, but it really evolved. And I think you go into it thinking like all you got to do is come up with a plot and some decent characters, and I've got to write 70 to 100,000 words, and then you pass it by an agent who's like, this got boring after the first 30 pages. Or I actually hired a developmental editor after kind of my first round of rejections and feedback from literary agents. And so her name is Grace. She's strange. So she's like a millennial from the Bay Area, lives in Chicago, and she likes like hair metal and Britney Spears, which like all those things don't go together. And she's a Harry Potter's fan. Like she's got Harry Potter tattoo on her arm. So none of that goes together. So I think, I kind of got, she's going to be pretty objective because she's all into different types of things. And she said, one thing you need to do, I think, is we'd love to time travel and come and go as we please, but it doesn't really work for a story. Like if there's no constraints on a story, like you think of Die Hard, if Hans Gruber is not going to blow up the building, then why do you need to negotiate with him? Like something's happening, it comes to a head, somebody gets killed. That's kind of like in Die Hard, it's like the rising tension and then the resolution of kind of a subplot. So you learn that the other things have to happen, and that I made it that, Darby's in this cool place in the 90s and music is cool again and she's doing cool stuff again, but did she just get back with her, her girlfriend that kind of she screwed up with? Yes and no. And then what else happens that might derail that? And what work does she need to do, or what things happen that sort of make the story more interesting? And there's also a twist in there where someone else comes back in time to kind of like facilitate what happens. But it's just, I don't know. I mean, I think writing is, like I said, it's like playing video games for me. It's just, you want to go to the next level. But once you get to the next level, there's some things you don't expect, and you want to play, you want to be able to play there. You want to be able to hang and get to the next level, but experience what's going on and have fun with it, not just get to the next thing and get to the next thing and get finished, win the prize and now you're done. So it's more experience. I don't know if that sounds like kind of obtuse or, I don't want to say that. I just love the essence of writing. There's more to it than that. But I kind of wanted to hang out in the 90s and talk about shows I've been to and share things, little stories. And so there's that piece. And also, like, I do want people your age to realize that there's a time when nobody had a cell phone, nobody had an email. And I remember the time I was on the bus where there's these goth girls over here and this punk girl over here, and they all have black dyed hair, and the one that has a cell phone is all of a sudden uncool because it's not punk to have a cell phone. Like that was actually a thing. Now everybody has a cell phone. No one would be like, oh, I'm not going to have a cell phone because I don't want to be a sellout. There was a time where that was actually thought about and talked about. Mm-hmm. So that became a scene in the book. So it's like I wanted to kind of share my 2 cents on life and have fun doing it, but also had an idea I thought was good that I wanted to develop, and I think I did that. So hopefully other people enjoy it as much, half as much as I did.
Yeah, you got the opportunity to write it. And I think when you make the analogy to the video game, right? Like you've been doing so much in writing for a very long time, right? It started out as a hobby, and you started to get paid to do it, that it essentially became one of your main gigs, right? Like this is how you've made money, and now it's like, all right, well, what's next, right? You like challenging yourself. You're an entrepreneurial guy. You like trying to go do things. You're trying to make stuff. You're not going to just sit back and say, oh, this is fun. Let me just keep doing this. Obviously, you're going to try and write a book. I mean, I think now did you think that this was going to be the book that you write? It seems like you've had this idea for a few years now, but it just seems like it's kind of the natural path of things, right? And then pretty soon this book's going to turn into a movie, and then you're going to get to write the screenplay, right? You get to do all that fun stuff. So that's going to be fun too, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I've had a couple people say, well, this it sounds like it could be a movie. And of course, that's a whole different thing there. I remember when I was at the San Francisco Writing Conference, I met another guy from Chicago who was, writing, like me at the time, trying to write his book, had a great idea and was trying to see it through. And I asked him what his story was about, and he asked what mine was about. He said, oh, it's like that Woody Allen movie, what he meant was Midnight in Paris. I was like, yeah, it kind of is, but I never really thought about that. I hadn't seen that movie since 2010, and this is probably 2019 that I had this conversation with this guy in the spring. And I was like, yeah, I guess there's and I hadn't seen Hot Tub Time Machine until I finished it, and my friend's like, you need to see Hot Tub Time Machine. I'm like, okay, I will when I'm done. Because you're always worried about like, well, I don't want to influence, I don't want to like, have anything like enter my mind and end up inadvertently using it. But I think time travel, like actually, I'm not a physics expert by any means. I don't actually think that time travel is possible in any. You can't convince me that it is possible. I could go, spend an hour talking about why, but it's such a theme that we've played with, going back to, H.G. Wells and, early 20th century. It's taken all different forms, and probably like 70% of time travel stories are along the lines of the same. It's someone goes back to the past or the future to remedy something, or inadvertently they're there and then they have a problem they have to fix. But I wanted this to be a little bit more willful, but also that, like my editor said, like there has to be some things she can't control. If she can just come and go as she pleases, then it's not really going to be suitable as a book. So then, I was like, well, okay. What's she going to be like? Her friend's going to say, we got to go to this concert. We got to, we got to do this. We got to do that. We got to, and then she kind of just rolls with it and things happen. So.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be a pretty sweet movie.
Yeah.
I'd watch it.
I have to.
Well, first,
I need to find out where John Cusack lives, or find his agent, and just set the book out, because he loves music. He's all about Chicago.
Chicago, yep.
Supposedly he just pops in every once in a while and goes to bars here, and I've seen him in Highfield. I was like, oh, there's Rainbow Room, there's Rainbow Club, or yeah. But I mean, I'm just trying to get people who would enjoy the book to be aware of it at this point. We'll see what happens down the road. I don't know what gets made to do a movie. They made less than zero into a movie and it was terrible. So I definitely don't want that.
All right. Yes. We don't want that. Obviously that's not the goal, but the goal is to go and buy Andy's book, 90 Days in the 90s. One more time, 90daysinthe90s.com. You can go to Amazon if you just want an easier way of going about it. Anything else you want to share with us? Where else maybe we can find some fun trivia? I was doing some trivia with you on LinkedIn. I don't think I got that. I think my answer, who was the first artist mentioned? I think I went with Eddie Vedder. I think I was wrong there, but
yeah, I had a little contest. So I was in order to kind of pump it up a little bit. My mom made a bunch of 90 Days in the 90s T-shirts, and so a big giant box showed up one day, like way more than I could ever wear. So I thought, well, hey Mom, is it cool if I have like a contest and give some of these away? So one of my kind of pump up questions was, how many times do I use the F-bomb in the book? So I had all kinds of guesses on that in the winter. I think it got to the point where I was like, the same number as a pivotal. This is what I said. A pivotal Hall of Fame closer who won the Cy Young, same number as his jersey, and a friend of mine from Florida was like 43, like Dennis Eckersley, he knew. So he got the T-shirt. But then, yeah, like you're saying, the other one I asked, there's about 250 musical artists named in the book. A lot of them are 90s bands, but a lot of them is stuff like, Darby really doesn't like post-Genesis movie soundtrack. Phil Collins hates it, like the Lion King soundtrack. So, of course, there's some snide comments in there. Doesn't like Nickelback, doesn't like, I think there's a Dave Matthews Band crack here and there, but not because they're a bad band. And so where am I going with this? So I asked, who's the first artist named in 90 Days in the 90s? And I had all kinds of guesses. A lot of it was the 90s grunge, of course. It was like Eddie Vedder or Pearl Jam or Alice in Chains, or, it's got to be Metallica. It's got to be, Alanis Morissette. And actually it was Macklemore is the first one mentioned, because Darby has backstory, this box of CDs that her kind of D-bag ex fiance who had no taste in music has these one-hit wonders. And I don't know, Michael Moore's probably fine to put on at a party or your wedding to dance to, what's that song? Thrift Store. Yeah, so Darby's bringing in her box of CDs that she's going to put in the $1 bin, and Macklemore gets mentioned as the first artist that just happens to come up in conversation, where she's like, "Hey, Spacey, you like Macklemore, don't you?" And she just rolls her eyes "No, I don't listen to mainstream pop." Because there's that dynamic. If you want to work in a record store, there's always people who are too cool for this, and I only listen to that, and I don't listen to major label artists. And so the music the music conversations that we had about the 90s music also brought up conversations about current artists. I mentioned Lizzo and I mentioned Billie Eilish, and because they're relevant in the conversation, because they have influences too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Contest was fun. I only came up with a couple of decent questions, but I might keep doing it. Who knows?
Love it. Keep doing it. Those are always fun for engagement on social media. Let the algorithm do what the algorithm does, Andy. You don't have to
Yeah,
worry
maybe
about
you
it
can help me
being.
with some '90s sports questions.
Oh, there we go. That'll be fun. Most of mine will be Mets related and probably pretty depressing. But hey, if you need help, man, I'm here to help you. I
How
appreciate
much
you for that.
money is
So,
Bobby Bonilla getting still paid? That's
oof. Yeah, that's a good one.
yeah,
Honestly, that's always a good one. Always cuts deep. We're coming up. Bobby Bonilla Day is about a month away, I think, right? July 1st. So,
yeah.
good for him. I get a lot of text messages on that day,
I'm
Andy. I get
sure
a
you
lot of
do.
text messages on that day. But Andy, this has been awesome, man. I sincerely appreciate you coming on again, talk about you a little bit, but obviously, most importantly, get to talk about the book. Excited to read it again one more time. Andy Frye, sports writer for Forbes, host and producer of Andy Frye's sports podcast, adjunct faculty. We didn't even get to talk about that too much. I'm sorry, man.
That's
Of
okay.
communications at National Louis University and author of 90 Days in the 90s. Literally came out today. You're actually probably going to listen to this tomorrow. So it came out yesterday. June 1st. 90daysinthe90s.com, Amazon.com. I'll put all that in the show notes. Andy, it has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, man. Appreciate your
Yeah,
time.
thanks for having me on. Let me talk about sports and music and Gen X '90s stuff because that's what keeps us going these days. That and Ben Gay and a little bit of Advil.
A little bit. Well, I think that other stuff's pretty legal too, so you might want to pay attention to that. But appreciate your time. Appreciate everyone's listening. Time's the only thing we don't get more of, so I appreciate